We're waiting for one of our speakers, Naved Siddiqi. He's going to sort of arrive, but we won't. I think we'll start without him. I think he'll be here any moment, but we've got a schedule to keep to. So I'll introduce our two speakers here. I hope you all had a nice lunch, and I'm really impressed that everyone got back relatively quickly. I hope my recommendations, my food recommendations, were satisfactory. So we're now going to resume with the third session, Not in My Name, Muslim Community Responses from Rushdie to Hebdo. We have three speakers: Catherine Heseltine of MPACUK, Inayat Bunglawala, and Naved Siddiqi, who is, as I said, on his way. So I'll begin by introducing Catherine. So Catherine worked as a nursery teacher until she was elected as CEO of the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, MPACUK, in 2010. Catherine joined MPACUK because she believed it would help in empowering Muslims in mainstream politics and media and dealing with Islamophobia. She's led campaigns against discrimination against women in mosques, poverty, as well as highlighting the situation in Palestine. So Catherine, if you'd like to go.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you for kind of inviting me here. I'm firstly going to exercise my freedom of speech and slightly change the title of my particular talk. From Rushdie to Charlie Hebdo, I'm actually going to focus on from Iraq to Charlie Hebdo. Two reasons for that. The second I will get to further on, but firstly, I'm not an academic, I'm an activist. What I have to bring is my direct experience of being involved in Muslim responses over the last 12 years, since the Iraq War, since I joined MPAC, since I became active in campaigning. So just a very brief view where my perspective comes from. Working with MPAC has actually been an amazingly interesting experience in terms of the number of interactions I've had with a hugely diverse range of Muslims as you campaign. For instance, the Operation Muslim Vote campaigns that MPACUK has run has involved, I've travelled up around the country to places like Bradford and Blackburn and Leicester, as well as near our doorstep down in Ilford and up in Brent North, knocking on doors. We've gone through the electoral register, picked out the Arabic Muslim names. I've gone knocking on doors saying, did you know your MP voted for the Iraq War? Did you know their Vice Chair of Labour Friends of Israel? These kind of facts. Use your vote. Also, I have, as you said, I'm a nursery teacher, but I've ended up as a spokesperson on mainstream media, from Channel 4 News, Sky News, BBC, etc. On all of these, every time there's an issue. We first got involved after 7/7, MPAC actually putting out press releases, spokespeople going on mainstream media, because it still is not happening in a professional, organised and adequate way, considering the media storm that is hitting us as a community. Again, that's given me a sort of insight into how Muslim reactions are perceived. Anyway, pushing on, because we've got brief time to outline, and hopefully we can then have that discussion. The second and much more important reason why I want to flip the title of this talk is because of the power of narrative, the stories we tell. Rushdie, Iraq War, Charlie Hebdo, they're all separate events, but the ways in which we connect different events together is what determines our reaction, our response to them, the meaning we make, and which events we connect and in which ways profoundly affect things. And I would argue that looking at Iraq and Charlie Hebdo is actually a much more powerful way of understanding what's happening in our world, because as we've seen, I gather, and apologies for not having been with you, been able to be with you all day, that the free speech hypocrisy has been pretty much shown up. And I would argue that Charlie Hebdo was not about free speech, it was all about war. Now that might seem a strange thing to say, but we've got to take it back, and we can all see the dominant narrative that is being played out in the mainstream media, within the political class, around events like Charlie Hebdo. It is that Muslims have a problem with free speech. They're backward, they are violent, they do not share our enlightened values, and they are a threat, and a threat that must be dealt with. Now, we all know there's many degrees of subtlety in the way that story is told, from kind of the EDL on one side to kind of broadsheet editorials on another, but actually it's the same basic narrative that is coming up every time. It doesn't matter if it's Charlie Hebdo or ISIS or halal meat or Muslims supposedly taking over Birmingham schools, gender segregation, grooming gangs, niqab. We all know the sort of merry-go-round that we go around, and it all just serves to reinforce this message and the buzzwords: extremist, Islamist, jihadist. All just conjure up the whole story. Now, what about the Muslim reaction? That's what we're talking about. I would argue that there are two main Muslim reactions to not only Charlie Hebdo but all of these type of events that we're witnessing, and to this dominant narrative. There's a third, but which is very vocal, and that is the sort of al-Muhajirun type ones that say, yeah, and the violence is right, and the backwardness is right, and play into the narrative that way. Now, obviously, we hear Anjum Chaudhry on Radio 4, but statistically speaking, the amount of support, I would argue, is not significant compared to the other reactions. Firstly, there's the reaction of saying those are the bad Muslims, who did Charlie Hebdo, who do whatever oppression it's being shown, and we're not like them. We're the good Muslims. We share your values, and this is what we have with the whole condemning thing. I've discovered as a Muslim spokesperson that generally interviewers won't let you open your mouth until you first condemned whatever it is you're talking with. It's no longer assumed that as a human being you're against brutal murder, or it's no longer assumed that Muslims are normal human beings who are against brutal murder. How do you feel about the beheadings? What kind of a question is that to ask a human being who's said nothing to approve of that? And again, the other problem with this condemning, apart from the fact that it's becoming a full-time job, there's so many things that Muslims are expected to condemn, that you just need a recorded message, or maybe we could stick labels on our head, I condemn, and we could get on with living our lives. But the other problem is the kind of logic that's taken from it. If you look at what Rupert Murdoch said after Charlie Hebdo, maybe most Muslims peaceful, but until they recognise and destroy their growing jihadist cancer, they must be held responsible. I.e., oh great, you condemn, but you're not doing enough, therefore you're guilty. And this also has this deep psychological effect that increasingly, I'm observing in sort of interactions, particularly with young Muslims, of this being uncomfortable in our own skins as Muslims, shame about belonging to the Ummah, not feeling able to stand up and comfortably, confidently be Muslim and have that identity. So there's this polarization, and I think the majority of Muslims feel caught in the middle, and therefore we have what I would call the ostrich response. Stick your head in the sand and hope it will all go away. Because I think a lot of us do, I know we all in some ways get drawn into the good Muslim, bad Muslim condemning thing, but I think a lot of us, feel that uncomfortable with, hang on, these double standards. hang on, you know, why is this being applied to me? And therefore don't fully jump on that that response, that bandwagon. And yet there is no, and I think it's beginning to change, but there has been no strongly articulated alternative narrative to explain what is happening. Now, again, not in my name. The only time I've walked under a placard that says that was on the Iraq War demonstrations, when the British government, who had a legitimate claim to represent me as a democratically elected government of the nation I'm a citizen of, were busy committing atrocities that way outweigh the scale of anything that is being committed by terrorist extremists from within the Muslim Ummah. You know, I think what we're often afraid to articulate confidently is to say that actually the violence and the oppression that we see within the Muslim world, within Muslim communities, is to a large extent a reaction to, a product of the policies of Western governments, whether that is the oppressive and brutal foreign policy pursued by our government and its allies. And you've got to remember who are our allies. It's not only the United States and what they are doing. I read a study about their drone war by 28 civilians killed for every person targeted. And again, just because they're targeted doesn't mean, you know, they've been afforded anything such, you know, luxury as an old-fashioned fair trial, etc., including American citizens. Now, you know, and yet we're afraid to stand up and say that, again, when we talk about radicalisation, that the role of the increasingly oppressive domestic policies that are being implemented with moves like the you know, crime, terrorism, the security bill, and, you know, those of you who've not gone through you know, read analysis of exactly what sort of alternative structures and second-class citizenship is being set up here. And again, this is second-class citizenship for Muslims now. These laws are being used against Muslims now, but it's in effectively the beginnings of an infrastructure of a sort of East German-style police state. You know, I just don't know how it is that, you know, we can be happy that powers to revoke the citizenship of British-born citizens are being used with no, you know, access to due process, you know, with all this banging on about British values and the rule of law, and yet there's no outcry because, oh, maybe that's happened to the bad Muslims and we're the good Muslims and that's all right, and or you know, where that paralysis is, or we've got our heads in the sand and we're busy distracting ourselves with purely spiritual things, and or, you know, or EastEnders, or you know, whatever it is. But I think because the you know, the polarized narratives are completely devoid of an understanding of the context of power. You know, who is it in the world who possesses the weapons of mass destruction? Who is it that makes the laws? Where you know, the classic is the Israeli-Palestinian thing, where, you know, these are equated as if there were two equal sides, where we're looking at, you know, people who've been ethnically cleansed, dispossessed, you know, put in an open prison, compared to a nuclear power which has, you know, very strong lobbies in all the Western power centres. When you take power out of it, you end up with actually a reversed view of the world. You know, the great Malcolm X quote about, you know, if you're not careful, the media will have you loving those who are doing the oppressing and hating those who are the oppressed. So, and again, because there is a lack of that strong alternative narrative, which I think the Muslim community has to take the lead in narrating, but there were people who were telling it much better and much more confidently than most Muslims already. You know, if you look at commenters like Owen Jones or Seamus Milne, etc., in the mainstream media, they are effectively putting that alternative narrative. And without that story, without that understanding of ourselves, again, when we're talking about threats to civilization, you know, the way in which Islamic civilization is left out from the history books. We should see this all connected together. We don't have those demands of equality and justice, of freedom coming through strongly. Now I know this session will be leading on to the session on Islamophobia, and to me the fact that these issues all point towards that future, to me there's no question we are living a reality of Islamophobia, and the future looks extremely scary. It's actually my youngest daughter's first birthday today. Now, no offence to all of you guys, but you might be wondering, well, why am I talking to you lot rather than just hanging out at home with them? And it is because of that, because I worry deeply about the future that my daughters, especially being Muslim, are going to grow up in this country, in this world. And my mum, who's not Muslim, she said to me after sort of watching the media coverage and debate unfolding after the latest Jihadi John stuff, she had a sleepless night. And I'm thinking, actually, what is the future like for my Muslim granddaughters growing up with this background? So I'll leave you with those thoughts and look for the discussion.
Okay, so as you can see, we're still waiting for Naved. I'll now move on to Inayat Bunglawala, who I imagine is possibly a familiar face to some of you. Now, Inayat joined the Young Muslims, or YM, as it came to be known, in 1987, and has long been involved in Muslim activism. Possibly some of you weren't born in 1987. I certainly was. He's probably best known for his work with the Muslim Council of Britain, in which he was media secretary up until 2010. He's written articles for The Times, The Daily Telegraph, The Guardian, and The Sun, apparently, focusing on Islam and current affairs. I didn't get a chance to check with you if this is true. Are you still a co-presenter? No. Alright, he's no longer a co-presenter of the weekly politics and media show on the Islam channel, but once upon a time he was. He's the founder and chair of Muslims for UK, a group set up to celebrate the UK's democratic traditions and to promote active Muslim engagement in our society. Inayat blogs at Inayat's Corner, which you can look up. So,
thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum everyone, good afternoon. As soon as we get this presentation working.
Always technical issues.
So, isn't there? I think we should do that, is that right? From the beginning. Oh, come on. Does it work?
Oh, yes.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, brilliant. It's lovely to see many old faces, and Samia made me feel very, very old. But there's people here who are older. Okay, let's start back at Rushdie. I was at university when this whole thing blew up in autumn of '88 or thereabouts, wasn't it? '88, yeah. So I was just starting my second year at university, and very quickly the whole Rushdie thing snowballed into a rallying call for Muslims, and people who up until then had thought of themselves as being Indian or Pakistani or Gujarati suddenly started referring to themselves as British Muslims, and it was really it was very much a crucible in which I think the whole Rushdie controversy acted as a kind of catalyst for the formation or the galvanization of this identity, of British Muslim identity. It was on the back of the whole Rushdie controversy and the very, very blistering polemics that we saw at the time. I mean, I can remember a Channel 4 voiced opinion piece by Faye Weldon at the time, which was very, very nasty, and but there was really no holds barred at that time. And it was on the back of all that debate and all the attacks on the Muslim community saw at that time that you saw a pushback from British Muslims. It's the first time I'd ever seen anything like it. You saw the Muslim institutes here coming together and developing programs. You saw a Muslim manifesto published at the time around 89 or 1990. You saw plans to create a Muslim parliament floated at that time as well. And the Muslim parliament, by the way, was supposed to be a non-territorial Islamic state. That was I know, it's fabulously embarrassing now, but we all signed up to it. You did. I'll come on to it. But we were a young community. My only excuse is we were a very, very young community, and we made lots of mistakes at the time. You know, if you look at the Board of Deputies of British Jews here, when was it founded? 1760 or something, right? Like 250 years old. But we were very, very young, very, very naive, and lots of cobblers was talked at the time. And we were very rude as well. People who didn't toe the line on the Rushdie affair, that the book must be pulped, and Rushdie can never be forgiven, you know, no matter if he recants and repents and comes groveling, whatever, the man can never be forgiven. So anyone who differed from that line was treated to a lot of hostility too from within the Muslim community. They came for a lot of mockery. I remember one particular chap being referred to as a tooth puller. This was an Islamic magazine referring to him as a Harley Street tooth puller. So a lot of rudeness as well. Let me just move on to this next slide. Is that going to work? Of course, the Rushdie book is not the only item in culture that's caused controversy. You've had calls for banning lots of things. Life of Brian, as I was growing up, Life of Brian was a must-see movie for us, right? It caused a lot of controversy at the time when it came out amongst Christian groups. Now, you know, it's regarded as a comedy classic. Music, you know, I would really love to sing You Get Off by Prince. Very explicit lyrics, incredibly explicit lyrics. I can't, you know, and there are countries which would not accept this kind of thing. And if Hussein there is an Indian artist, a huge talent in India. He was forced to leave India in the last few years of his life, and he died not in his homeland as a celebrated artist. He died in Doha, in Qatar, just a few years ago. So there are always calls to ban things, and if there's a refrain to this presentation, that was very careful to go down that road about banning. There's Richard Dawkins in his very big best-selling book, The God Delusion, referred to God in a very polemical manner here, right? This passage led to him being described by the chief rabbi as anti-Semitic, and Dawkins is a well-known scientist, a well-known atheist, and yet I would argue that in any healthy society he should be allowed, of course, to say this, right? There's no reason why anyone should not be allowed to make their opinions public in the most robust manner as they say fit. He's not in there inciting hatred of other people, right? He's not inciting hatred of Jewish people or Christian people or Muslim people. He's just making clear that he believes in this book, the Old Testament, is a pretty vile book, and the God portrayed in the Old Testament is a pretty vile God. It's his point of view. The whole history of this debate about freedom of speech and suspicion towards religion, of course, goes back a long way with all the whole controversy of Galileo, where you remember, because he supported the idea or the Copernican thesis that it was the Earth that revolved around the Sun and not the other way around. he faced the Inquisition from the Catholic Church, and he spent the last 9 years of his life under house arrest. Others were not so fortunate. Giordano Bruno, who said that the stars that we see at night time are not just pinpricks of light, they are suns by themselves, they're entire suns, and they have planets revolving around them too. He was burned at the stake by the Catholic Church. So there's this suspicion towards religion is not entirely without basis in Europe. At one time, of course, Europe used to look at Muslim science and Muslim books. Sorry, by the way, my apologies. Sorry, and Muslim science and there's a very famous incident in the early 16th century where Paracelsus took Ibn Sina's Qanun and burnt it into a student bonfire. And the reason he gave was that Europe had the right now to experiment by themselves, and he was challenging church authorities, and he wanted to be allowed to carry out dissections on bodies. At that time it was prohibited, and also it was a major handicap suffered by Muslim science as well, which increasingly would prohibit the dissection of human bodies, regarding it as a kind of mutilation. But this burning of the book, or Ibn Sina's book, was a very hugely symbolic moment in Europe, and what we saw was Europe pushing forward in the sciences, and very soon, very quickly overtaking ancient knowledge. Why criticism? Why robust criticism? One of the arguments I remember the whole time of the Rushdie affair was, we as Muslims are not averse to criticism. We just don't want sacrilege. We oppose rudeness in public debate, etc. So, if Rushdie had written a more considered academic book, it would have been okay. But because he was insulting, therefore, bastard must die and the book must be burnt. When it comes to criticism, a society that cannot criticize itself or allows criticism robustly if you mark off areas as off the map and not allowed to be debated, it leads very quickly to stagnation, as we saw in the Muslim world as well, and we're still seeing much of the Muslim world. Darwin's book, there's no way Darwin's Origin of Species could have been published. I can't think of a place in the Muslim world in the mid-19th century that would have allowed the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species. I think the shame is, even now, today, I can't imagine many places which would allow the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species. And Darwin himself was very reluctant to publish the Origin of Species, in Victorian England. He was afraid of the controversy it would stoke. But today, Darwin's theory of evolution stands slap bang in the middle of modern biology, right? Nothing in biology makes sense except in light of Darwin's theory of evolution. Banning orders. The funny thing is, after the whole Rushdie affair and the calls to ban the book, etc., we seem to have come full circle now, where at the time we were told, when Muslims were being told that, look, these are the boundaries of free speech. Rushdie is not inciting hatred, is not inciting racial hatred or religious hatred, and therefore you just need to tough it out, and this is a book, if you don't like it, don't read it. Interestingly though, the government's response today has in response to terrorist threat has become rather worrying, as we hear now of banning orders against individuals, threats to close mosques, as we heard this week, a blacklist of individuals and organizations that the government will not now engage with. They're drawing this up this week. We just heard of this week. The bullying we're seeing of universities, where certain speakers are going and the government is putting pressure on these universities to deny them a platform. Not because they've said anything unlawful, because they could be prosecuted if you said anything unlawful, but just because it's speech that the government doesn't like. They've deemed it beyond acceptability, and therefore these people must be denied a platform. It's really, actually, it's quite worrying that it's now the government that's now saying this. This was Theresa May earlier this week on Monday. So I chose this particular photo because I imagined her being rather tipsy when she said this. Our definition of extremism, look at this, the definition she's put. And she said, I challenge anyone to find this definition unreasonable. Right? This is what she said. So it includes all this stuff and the mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. Since when has that become the criterion of extremism, the tolerance of different faiths and beliefs? Why should you not be allowed to say that I find this belief utterly ridiculous? In fact, if you just go back a few slides, right? This chap would be in danger, right? This chap who regard. Can you all read that? No. Oh, shall I read that? This is fantastic. Look, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. I like that, all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. Look at that. Now, if we compare that with what dear Theresa May is saying about the mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs, it would jar a bit, right? My goodness, Richard Dawkins might find himself being banned at universities and regarded as undesirable. But this is how ridiculous the government's response has now become. And it's actually quite funny when you look at what was going on 25 years ago and what we were being asked to put up with. It's actually quite interesting. Okay. This is my free speech, okay? David Cameron, twat. You might remember this. This was a couple of weeks ago. It was a week ago, or 2 or 3 weeks ago, King Abdullah died of Saudi Arabia, right? And you know that they lowered the flag in honour of the death of this great reformer who brought out this medieval kingdom into the modern age. I mean, there's a few places in the Muslim world which are as repressive as Saudi Arabia, right? I mean, I remember going there many times, and you cannot get hold of one of the translations of the Quran I have is of Muhammad Asad. You can't get hold of that in Saudi Arabia. It's deemed not a acceptable translation and commentary of the Quran, and therefore it's not allowed. And it's quite common actually. You know, when magazines are shipped over there, photographs are snipped out, and undesirable passages to be blackened out. It's a very repressive state. And to see Cameron and the British government time after time lecturing Muslims here about learning and respecting British values and why these values are necessary to uphold, while kowtowing in this very it's actually quite embarrassing, is it not? Is it not quite embarrassing that Britain as a state would lower its flag for the Saudi kingdom? Quite demeaning. Yeah. My time's coming to an end, so I'll end with this actually, because I think it was quite fitting to end with someone Rushdie, the thing that I began with him. As the whole speech has been, look, we got it all wrong, and actually the Liberals were right on this particular point. I'll end with someone Rushdie. In that, I think looking back at the whole Rushdie affair, the whole cartoons saga, I think that there is a great freedom deficit in much of the Muslim world and in much of Muslim thinking. I can't see at the moment any massive breakthroughs in that area. It's, if recent events in the Middle East are to go by, things are heading in a different direction. We just have to hope that we can gather a momentum to reverse this, and we can allow a space for people to criticise freely and however robustly as well. There's and we should never lose hope that this can happen. Actually, there's a wonderful passage in Ziad Sabal's book, actually, I want to mention him, where I told you that all those years ago, the Muslim Institute published the Muslim Manifesto and called for the launch of Muslim Parliament, etc. There's a passage in Ziad Sabal's book where Dr. Heseltine Siddiqi comes to visit him. And I think it's the ending of your book, I think it's towards the end of your book. So Heseltine Siddiqi, I can't remember the year, but clearly many years after the call for the formation of Muslim Parliament, this non-territorial Islamic state, comes to see Ziad Sardar and just says, "We got it all wrong. Everything we're talking was wrong." And in a sense, it really summarises how I feel about all those years ago, that we got it all wrong. If anything good came out of it, it was this creation of a British Muslim identity. That's the only positive I can see that came out of it. Otherwise, it's deeply, deeply embarrassing. So on that very happy note, thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much.
It changed quite a lot.
Yes.
Hardly about 10 years ago.
Yes.
So
Still changing.
I'm now going to introduce our final speaker, Naved Siddiqi, who I've known for a very long time actually, and he's always a little bit late. Must be where I get it from. Anyway, so Naved. So Naved Siddiqi is a research fellow of the Policy Research Centre at the Islamic Foundation in Leicestershire. He's the lead trainer and coordinator of the centre's training services and has delivered training on British Muslim issues to over 1,000 participants across public and voluntary sectors. His research interests include integration challenges, demographics, Sharia and comparative law, and gender issues. Naved is, and this is how I know Naved. Naved is a former managing editor of ML, the Muslim lifestyle magazine. I don't know if any of you remember it. He was tutored in the social and political history of Islam by the late Professor Zaki Badawi, and has been a policy advisor at the Islamic Society of Britain for 8 years. And before Naved begins, I would just like to apologise to Naved because he did send me a really nice picture of, I don't know if any of you watch Gogglebox, and I somehow couldn't manage to translate that into projecting it onto the screen. So if you can just imagine, what was the
well, it was just a selection of the various people
of the families watching TV. So if you could just conjure that up in your minds as he speaks. Thank you.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm going to just offer a few random thoughts, and hopefully a lot of these things will be picked up in the discussion, the question session that follows this. But I did want to put up I've recently developed what I call the Gogglebox test, and the reason I find that program really fascinating is because it helps us to think about how things are received. You see a whole range of people, and this is the demos. These are the people just watching television, and sometimes they watch very topical things. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the program, but it is really quite interesting, and it's sometimes worth thinking about because when we're in our little ponds and in our social circles, we often really feel very, very strongly about a number of issues that are really, really important to us. I reckon if you were to go to anybody on that television and say something like prevent, what is prevent, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. And yet within our own sort of circles, these things are really, really important to us. So sometimes it gives a sense of perspective and it helps you to think. Because I think the Gogglebox question really brings about a circular question about the demos and about what people really feel and what people are really thinking. And it's something that Trevor Phillips, who's been a champion of equalities and human rights, recently posed in his question in his documentary, was asking, what is it that people really feel? And I think we need to think quite deeply about that. Now, I think these discussions are really, really important, because we can't all agree on everything, and I think we all need to be in the mix discussing these things. I was there in the march for the Satanic Verses, and like many of you, I think, who were there, we've sort of grown up through those years, and Inayat touched upon that as well. My view about the media may be somewhat controversial, but I actually think that overall I would contend that the media is more fair, quite fair. I don't think it's as unfair as we think it is. My own view is that the real problem is public opinion itself, and I think that's really been the dangerous shift. I think that before, public opinion wasn't as potent as it is now, but if you look at forums and discussion threads, even on positive issues, they become very nasty very, very quickly. And so for me, there are a whole range of underlying anxieties in society. I think that when it comes to the media, we sometimes underestimate the appetite for good news as well. So I think public opinion itself is a real worry. And yet I do also believe that people are generally quite fair. And in that sense, the public opinion test is really, really key to us. In the jury system, you are really judged by your peers because they look upon your actions and they make, on balance, the fairest judgment about your behaviour. And I think the broad public opinion test is something we need to think about. I'm a firm believer that the best defence for, is it Islamophobia or Muslim phobia? What's the right term? I think it's more Muslim phobia myself. I think it's more of an anti-Muslim prejudice. But I'm a firm believer that the best defence is civil society itself. But that requires real relationships beyond tea and biscuits and photos in the local press, beyond press releases and sending pleasantries. It requires you to really work with civil society institutions, and it requires us to really give selflessly. There needs to be a genuine selflessness and concern for the causes of others, for them to be able to speak up for us, if you want to have it in that sense. And I think one of the questions that people may ask and may see is, are Muslims just in it for themselves? Is it just when it's Muslim issues? And I think that's a really key point, because if people are feeling that, then they won't have the empathy that is needed for coherence in a civil society. I also believe that, there is a strong feeling that, there is a lot of anxiety and anti-Muslim prejudice. I think in many quarters this is very real and very strongly felt, and this is worrying, as I say. But I also think that we cannot really be true in eradicating, we cannot be true to our principles in eradicating Muslim prejudice unless we are just as generous and forthright and concerned about anti-Semitism. And I don't think we can hide behind political issues in that line. We have to be genuine and seen to be genuine. And I don't really think we are seen to be genuine for whatever reason. I know Islamophobia or Muslim phobia is bad, but I will still contend that it's not as bad as the American experience, where you have much more organised efforts to vilify Muslims. I don't think it's as bad as the French experience. I don't think it's bad as Eastern Europe. I don't think it's bad as Turkey or Nigeria. I don't think it's bad as places like Saudi Arabia, things like that. But I think a searching question for me is, what do Muslims actually offer British civil society by our civil presence? How are we enriching society? One of the harsh tests for me is, if all Muslims left, will we really be missed? And what I'm trying to say here is, what are we really known for? What is it that people who are watching Gogglebox, the people, the demos, what do they actually see us for? This is not about legal rights or anything like that. This is about how people actually feel. We all know our teachings: honesty, integrity, cleanliness, manners, keeping our word, excellence, beauty. I was going to mention punctuality, generous, charitable, equity, selflessness. These are all the teachings imbibed in our Quran, in our Islamic teachings, are we really known for any one of these? If we were really known for integrity, if we were really known for cleanliness, or for keeping our word, or for excellence, I think the rug would be pulled beneath from people's feet. I don't think the appetite for a culture of demonization would be so easy. I think there are real anxieties out there, and a real sense of victimhood is being felt. But I think that can also be quite damaging for ourselves as well. We seem to be confusing things. We seem to be confusing condemning with apologizing, for example. They're two very different things. When the Charlie Hebdo issue happened and the I am Charlie hashtag was going around, in many quarters it was misunderstood. People felt that, because for me it was just about showing solidarity. It wasn't about endorsing the publication. And so, like an alternative I am a Muslim thread came out, hashtag came out, and I think we need to think about how that actually is received. Because what people were really struggling was the right to offend is the right for our collective well-being. We have to give people the right to be able to offend. And I think there are, a range of issues. Britain seems to have become a nation of victims. Everyone seems to be leapfrogging over each other, competing for their victim status. Everyone seems to be some kind of a survivor. And to not blame the victim has been translated to not exploring the role of the victim. I think that's controversial, because I think there are very searching questions that we need to ask ourselves in our own introspection. But I think that in the end, it is real relationships that remain the key. I always think about that hadith when somebody travelled to go and meet the Prophet Muhammad, and he must have heard all kinds of things about him. All kinds of Muslim phobia and Islamophobia existed. When he came to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet gave him livestock and sheep, and he went back saying, this man is generous. That was his report. What are our people to people, person to person encounters really like? And I think that goes to the heart of some of the issues surrounding some of the furor and responses and confusion that came out of the Charlie Hebdo affair. And I think that it's really important that our relationships are solid and built properly. It's much more powerful for somebody from a Jewish background to say this needs to stop, or from a Christian background to say this needs to stop, but it needs to be a two-way thing. And on that note, I'll end. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Naved. I think we've got a spectrum of opinion here. I can see quite a few hands going up already, so I'll throw it out to the audience straight away. Sunny, you had a question.
Sunny Kandul. Thanks for that. Really enjoyed your speech, and it's good to see the progression. But I would actually disagree. I actually think that I think Sikhs and Hindus would have behaved exactly the same way with regards to Salman Rushdie. But I think that's part of the learning experience. You kind of learn from the controversies of the past, and you see where you make mistakes and things have changed as a result of that. It's part of the evolution process that you make mistakes. So I don't think it's entirely a bad thing. I think it is what it is.
Remember the Be'ezzati affair? Be'ezzati.
Yeah,
Be'ezzati,
exactly. The Be'ezzati affair. The same thing happened with Sikh. But actually, my point was for Catherine. Catherine, in your speech, you lumped together Charlie Hebdo, the rape gangs in Rotherham, ISIS, Iraq, and many other issues together. Aren't you doing exactly what Muslims rightly complain about, which is lumping a whole bunch of issues together just because the common thread is Muslims? I see what happened in Rotherham primarily as a problem of violence against women, not anything to do with Islam. And I think some extremists did blame Islam. But if we take the extremist response to everything as a representative of the mainstream, then to me that's as bad as taking as the people who take Anjum Chadri as a representative of all Muslims.
Like I said, the narrative about all of these stories being about backward, violent Muslims who don't share our values and who are a threat it is told in subtly different ways, and the nuances and complexities of the world are slightly more acknowledged in some places. However, I think what I didn't pick up on, and what I would like to pick up in response to Naveed's talk, is the existence of an Islamophobia industry. I urge anyone who's not read the report produced in America, Fear Inc., analysing the hundreds of millions of pounds worth of funding going into this network of neoconservative think tanks, organisations, media outlets to produce this overall narrative. So no, I don't think every kind of journalist who picks up these buzzwords, or every politician who grabs them is part of some big conspiracy theory. But I do think that there is clearly this thread, and I think we can be so far up in our ivory towers sometimes that we don't actually kind of understand this experience from the inside. I think we think we're going to be outside of it because we're the intellectuals, we're the middle class, we're this kind of demonization of Muslims, and this again to look at this in the absence of looking at the way that the neoconservative movement or Zionist lobbies are systematically involved in the demonization of all of these things. And I'm not saying there's not genuine problems within the Muslim community. Myself and MPAC, we've been involved on campaigns on things like Muslim women's rights in the mosque, the state of the mosque generally, total lack of accountability, transparency, so many issues in the community. But again, how on earth we're meant to have this sophisticated level of self-criticism and growth if we don't deal with the fact that we are increasingly under siege in this world. You can't, it's like people say, oh, well, the Palestinians, they're not very good on women's rights or homosexuality or this and that. How do you expect, some amazing, tolerant, enlightened, society that leads, pioneers this and that to rise out of the open prison of Gaza? And I think it's increasingly the same, for Muslims here in the atmosphere in this country.
Back to Sunny's points.
No, I mean, to be honest, I agreed with Sunny's point because I tried to say at the beginning of my presentation that the whole Rushdie affair was perhaps one of the reasons it acted out in the way it did was because the Muslim community was a very new community and didn't have the experience or the foresight to see some of the consequences of its actions in the way maybe a Jewish community would have had because of its history here. So I do agree that a lot of that would have been a similar reaction if it had been another new community, Sikhs or Hindus or whatever. Absolutely.
Do you want to quickly make a comment and then I'll bring in the lady?
Yeah, just for clarification, I mean, I do accept that there is this industry in America, and I did actually touch upon it. Yeah.
With transatlantic links.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, I accept that is there, but I think sometimes we can underestimate how good and how fair people are, and I think that we sometimes underestimate how good and how fair people are. If you take something like the grooming. No, I think one of the things that we miss is that very few of the examples are actually threatening the state. Whereas when you look at Muslim issues, there is an issue about the state itself being threatened. I think that's a dimension that we sometimes miss. And I think on the issue of the Rotherham sex grooming gangs, and there are a number of gangs all around the country. You often hear things like, what about Jimmy Savile, and most of them are white, and we're missing actually the point, I think. But I think if we just count numbers, yes, of course, most offenders would be white, and most of it actually are family members, stepfathers, and it takes place in the family home. But what we see here is a particular pattern. of a community network and these gangs being able to hide within that community network, a whole a nighttime economy of taxi drivers, of takeaways, of bed and breakfasts. And for years, these gangs have been very organised and been able to hide within that. Now, if we don't address that, then there's a fear that somebody else will pick that up and say, well, there's a community-wide problem here. So I think we need to be very, very careful about, what we're saying and how we understand different problems. We can't just put basic numbers onto the board and say one is equal to the other. But I do accept that there are lobbies out there. There always will be. In a free world, you're going to have an Islamist lobby, you're going to have a Zionist lobby or a pro-Israeli lobby, you're going to have a pro-Palestinian lobby, you're going to have all kinds of lobbies in our world. They exist, but we still need to think about that goggle box test, and we still need to think about how it is these things are received. And if we're constantly within our small pond, we sometimes lose that broader picture.
Okay, and there's a lady, if I could take your question. If you could speak up a bit, sorry.
Opinions and insights. My question is to Naved. I completely take your point about accountability and being introspective and looking at us as Muslims and saying what are we doing to benefit ourselves or to benefit the society in which we live. And yes, I think it's very easy to shift the blame onto everyone around us. But coming back to your point about public opinion, about the issue being public opinion, and you saying that the media is actually incredibly fair.
I didn't say incredibly fair, but yeah.
Okay, not incredibly fair, but a lot more fair than maybe people think it is. How is public opinion shaped? Because increasingly people do take their opinions, or they do form their opinion based on what is going on around them. Unfortunately, we're not anymore a society of active seekers of knowledge. We do learn a lot through osmosis, just through what we see on the TV and what we hear. So where are we getting that information? I would assume that public opinion is often shaped by what the media gives out, what it puts out. So to say that it's simply about the people and what they're thinking in their own minds. Because what's happening in the media is we don't actually hear all the good things that some people do. When we're talking about Islamophobia, half the reason that it's happening is because it's just as much about what you don't hear about as what you do hear.
What I'll do is I'll take Zia's point and then Andrea's point, and then I'll bring in the panel to respond. Zia.
I just want to make some historic corrections.
Okay. briefly, and maybe Meryl can clarify or.
No, I feel clarification. I want as well.
First, let me start with the history of science. The quote from Rushdie.
Zia, can you speak up?
The quote from Jacob Rushdie that I showed about the book burning in Rushdie doesn't actually give the full context. There were two reasons why the books were burned in Europe. One, he was seen as a dangerous free thinker by Catholic Church, and that was one reason. And the Catholic Church was against his books being taught in Europe. That was one reason the books were burned. And the second, some of the scientists who were involved in book burning as well did not want anything to have to do with Arab science, because they wanted to link it and saw it as inferior. And that's, I mean, the canons was a standard textbook in the 18th century. So there was nothing wrong with it. The canon didn't say you cannot dissect. It shows you how to dissect. So in fact, the argument is not quite correct. The second thing about Darwin is that when Darwin was in Origin of Species was published, the dominant Muslim power was the Ottomans. And the Ottoman ulama said, what a great book The Origins of Species is, and why haven't we done something like that? They embraced the book and translated it into Turkish to say that it would never be published in Hebdo. So there are two historic points which are totally wrong. But there are lots of historic points which we can fight. But one of the points is this. First of all, yes, the Muslim community was young, but it was not that young. We had organized numerous demonstrations. For example, the famous demonstration that the burning of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the 1967 Iraq-Iran war, we knew how to organize and how to protest, and we knew how to protest with dignity and with some decorum. What happened in the Rushdie affair was that those who knew how to do these things were not as outraged as some of your colleagues, right? Including Siddiqi and all that, who then hijacked the history you're describing is essentially a history of one particular group who hijacked the whole enterprise and then became a spokesperson and insisted. I mean, Siddiqi asking people in a public meeting how many people will execute, Rushdie. I mean, who would do that sort of thing? Only some sort of demented individuals would do that. And that's the demented history you're talking about. There were lots of other groups who were talking very sensible things. Many young people. And there were some intellectuals like me and Merrill who were saying, look, in our tradition, books have always fought books. So therefore we'll fight this, we'll do our struggle with books. We wrote a distorted imagination. And what has happened, I think, is that tendency coming from Naveed's current institution, Islamic Foundation, the Jamaat Islami and the Muslim Brotherhood and all that, that tendency, which tends to be outraged much more quickly, right, then became the dominant groups who negotiated the relationship between Islam and the host community. And that's the history that's, I think, is very problematic. And it became a kind of hegemonic system that then marginalized a lot of very sensible words.
I agree with that.
Unless Mala wants to add something to it.
Mel, do you have something to add?
I'm only going to ask Inayat, when in his growing up was he defending a woman wearing a jalabia as being more Islamic than shalwar kameez? Was, you know, I mean, you were at the forefront of that case. Was that before you grew up or after?
No, if this is in reference. Sorry. If this is in reference to the case, I'm just trying to remember. You're correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, that's it.
Shabina Begum.
That's it. It was a lieutenant girl, wasn't it?
Yeah. She was
So this was a girl who was wearing a black long jalbab, who wanted the right to go to school in that jalbab, and the school prohibited her.
Because the school had agreed
yes, they had
on
a shalwar kameez
uniform,
yes,
which was shalwar kameez.
I agree.
And you stood up for the principle that
She should be allowed to wear it.
but the jilbab is more Islamic because it was an Islamic dress. That was the argument that was made. The community makes
when I was a cub reporter,
Yeah.
one of the biggest stories I did was for the Shalwar Kameez stories.
Yeah.
Shalwar Kameez were banned in schools.
Yes.
In Hackney.
So you move on, the society accepts, and then you tell it it's not enough.
Hold on.
Can I come in here on this issue? Women's dress.
I don't mind admitting my mistakes, but I don't want to admit things I didn't bloody say. So no, I definitely didn't say the shalwar kameez is less Islamic. I would never have said that.
I mean, we're getting off.
Yeah, no. But the point is,
you're getting me confused with someone else in your dotage.
No. In my dotage I may be, but I'm not confusing this. The point is, we are, as a community, being asked here to recant. Who is being asked to recant? And about what? The ingestion of victimization has been a policy put forward by certain sectors of the community, that we are victims, we have been victimized. When what we need to do and spend more time is organizing participation, and that we have been very loath to do. Freedom of speech is an economy. It's an economy that is ruled outside our control. But unless we learn how to play the game, we are never going to move forward. And just, unfortunately, you're a little too keen to promote the idea of free speech as something that we have to endorse full scale without realizing how flawed the freedom of speech actually is. Richard Dawkins has no problem. He has supreme access to the media for his views. It is anyone who wishes to argue with him who does not have sufficient and equal freedom of speech. Those are the issues that we need to be concentrating on.
So I'll bring Catherine, and then Inayat, if you could briefly comment, and then there was a question directed at Naved, and then I'll take Andrew's question. So
I'm actually really shocked, because when we talk about tolerance and difference of opinion within Islam, so what if he had taken a position? He didn't, but if somebody did take a position saying that their interpretation of Islam and Islamic dress was that a jilbab was a more authentic interpretation of it than a shalwar kameez, then that should be their right to interpret Islam that way, just as much as, obviously I'm not wearing a jilbab. I don't feel that that's, would make me a better Muslim. But I respect the right of anyone who does interpret Islam that way. It doesn't affect me, it doesn't harm me, and it doesn't affect a schoolgirl going to school. If you turn these things backwards and said, if it was somebody who believed in jilbab or niqab being a more authentic interpretation, attacking someone who doesn't believe in hijab or jilbab or shalwar kameez, then would be all rallying around and saying that's their right to difference of opinion with Islam. Why can't people with more stricter, more Salafi type interpretations of Islam have a right to those opinions where they don't infringe anybody else? No, we can't.
They do that is their whole function.
So if somebody teaches that they interpret Islamic dress to be wearing, the better, a more authentic interpretation is wearing a long skirt, that somehow leads directly to people going out and murdering aid workers in Syria. This is
outrageous.
Yeah, this is fundamentalist.
So no, I just say that
you have to see the argument. It just doesn't stop there. When you go to the man, they will say you must have beard. Then they will say you must do this, and then eventually jihadis will jump around you, and then you must now go to Syria, because the Prophet said the Syrians, this hadith is circulated, the Syrians are the best of all possible people, and a time will come when you must go and support them. This hadith applies to that now, and off they go.
The line where you stop that is where the people try to impose their interpretation of Islam on other people. If somebody wants to practice that interpretation of Islam and it doesn't affect me, I am not going to try and stop them. But if they try to stop me following my interpretation of Islam, that is where I draw the line. And it's very dangerous, I think, to do it backwards.
Okay, Catherine. Now,
Sorry,
now Andrew had a question, and then I'd like Naved to respond to the point that was made to him. Andrew, if you just... we're just going to take a couple more questions. Then
But I was very kind of intrigued how you kind of separated public opinion from the media, because I think they mutually craft each other. The media crafts public opinion, and public opinion crafts the appetite for certain types of media. And what I noticed as a non-Muslim coming from the Netherlands, which I think Islamophobia is worse than here, I agree with your statement. I think the UK is quite open, not the Daily Mail and everything, but you have quite a variety of nuanced media, which I think is it's a very good thing. Because in the Netherlands, if I look at talk shows, I watched this talk show just a few weeks ago with this really interesting young politician from this party in Rotterdam called Nida, and it's a Muslim-inspired party that's very socially active, very diversity embracing, really a fresh voice in the sort of Dutch society. Sitting at a table with this sociologist that's just written this report on rising radicalism, everywhere, right? The chair of this conversation, if you see the way he frames his questions, they're completely open towards a sociologist. So what have you observed with this? And what have you observed with that? And then taking points that the sociologist has made, he then goes to this really interesting, his name is Noordin El-Wadi, if anybody wants to look him up. takes really, these kind of blatant black and white points and saying, so, do you believe people that leave Islam should be killed for apostasy? No. Yes or no? Yes or no? And then, he's just trying to kind of give some context and, move away from the question. But the very way in which questions are framed and the person holding the power of framing those questions, it has an inherent bias. And that is an inherent bias that you do not recognize unless you dig really, really, really deeply into wider historical issues, into wider understandings, into wider interpretations. And I think most people, especially if you have this idea that religion is oppressive, because that's a kind of this, of course it's something that comes from the Enlightenment, which needed to happen in Europe, in the European context as well. But people have this very narrow definition of what religion is. So often they don't even bother to kind of explore the diversity within it. They just drink it. They just drink it as this normal reality. So I think there's an absence of recognizing bias because there's an absence of framing and there's an absence of vocabulary to be able to question these people and to be able to recognize the bias. And you even see this absence of awareness sometimes in Muslim speakers invited onto the program, just overwhelmed with these really biased questions and fighting between being able to deconstruct them and trying to rationalize what it is they're being put on the spot for, and actually answering the question from a sort of free, open context.
Okay.
So
now I'm mindful of the fact that we've just got a couple of minutes left. So what I'll ask you, and I'm sorry for all of those of you who have further questions, I'll just ask each speaker to just sort of answer the final points, and I'll start with Naved.
Okay, yeah. So I agree with you, and I do agree with you as well. They're not mutually exclusive. There are a number of things that form public opinion. It goes backwards and forwards. In fact, in many ways, what I'm saying is that in some respects, things have got worse. Because what I said, that over the years, the media has become fairer, but public opinion has, in many respects, become worse. Now, everyone is aware of Anjem Choudary and all of the damage that he's done. Now, this is the voice of Anjem Choudary right here, without the media. So without the oxygen of publicity, he's not heard. But with the oxygen of publicity and the papers that he sells, he's able to cause tremendous damage. So I'm in no way saying that the media does not have an impact, but in our social discussions, there is a trend and a tendency for Muslims to almost put everything onto the media and to understand the media in very simplistic terms as well. And in that sense, this sense of victimhood just breeds this sense that the media is controlled, it's a machine, and that takes away from soul-searching questions of introspection that I think are really, really key. At the broadest level, though, I do think we are still fair. If you think of something like the last leg, there you have comedy, and there you have a sense of people who are talking at the broadest level, and they're able to deal with issues like extremism and the Charlie Hebdo affair through comedy and receiving tremendous amounts of applause and getting that message across. And that, to me, is an optimistic sign that people are still fair-minded and that we need to focus on that optimism and not put everything into this mystery media machine. But I do think that a lot of the things that also shape people's opinions is not just the media, but also the lived experience and fear. And people are fearful. You know, there is war out there. This country has been attacked. There have been terrorist attacks. There are scary things happening out there. There are people who are saying we are going to harm your country. That has an impact on ordinary people in ordinary homes. Absolutely, absolutely.
Sorry, Andrew.
Yes. Yes.
I'm afraid I'm just asking each speaker to wrap up now. Inayat, if you wouldn't mind just...
Very quickly, two points. Zia was perfectly right. That the Salman Rushdie affair was hijacked by people who are far more politically savvy than liberal Muslim intellectuals who still to this day
self-appointed leaders.
Well, the fact is that they had more followers than the liberal intellectuals that I remember at the time. And they managed to galvanize them and bring them out onto the streets. So they've always been far smarter at capturing a public and getting them revved up. But that's, to be honest, that's what politics is, isn't it? That's, in the end, it's how many people can get behind you. That's what a good politician does. And often, it's the ones that are the least scruples that are the better politicians. It's not just a Muslim Malay. It's a Malay in humanity. There's an additional point I just wanted to make. Sorry, if you don't mind, which is this very briefly, which is to do with freedoms, and you know, one of the slides I pointed out how in 25 years it's now the government that's now looking to encroach on our freedoms and with its banning orders, etc. So we try to push back at this. We try to, because the government is trying now, with a lot of money in its coffers, to re-engineer British Muslim society by funding certain groups who will push out narratives that it wants to be pushed out in the Muslim community. So all we said, okay, because we are taxpayers, right? Who are these groups that you're funding? So we put a freedom of information request in. They refuse to tell us which groups they're funding. That is this is the quandary we're in with this freedom of speech at the moment. When it suits them, they take it away. They won't tell us who they're funding.
Okay.
How bizarre.
No, you know, I need to give Catherine the final say, and then we'll finish this session.
Okay. I think I'd just like to sort of look at it as if it's a question of which way the river is flowing. You know, we've picked apart a lot of you know, subtleties and nuances, but I come back to narrative being the basic way that human beings understand and make meaning of the world, and that the narrative at the moment is flowing one way, you know, in the direction of a demonization of Muslims generally. Now, you know, the thing is, listening to Naveed's talk or some of the points that made, you know, I'm kind of tick. Yes, we need to contribute to society. Yes, you know, we Islam gives us much wider causes than those that just directly affect Muslims. Yes. But we seem to be, you know, sort of blind to actually how bad things are, you know, in the Muslim world, how powerless Muslims are, you know, around the world and in this country. And again, I've worked on these issues through democratic campaigning. I know how if you start campaigning against the Iraq war, you start to be smeared as an extremist. As you start campaigning against Israel's atrocities, you start to be smeared as an anti-Semite. And I now see, you know, democratic ways being blocked out by these. You know, this infrastructure of labelling people extremists, this very Orwellian world, and I see these kind of tick lists, and I tick them and go, right, you're right, I fit your criteria of extremist because of, you know, my views on foreign policy, etc. But I feel I am defending British values. I am also defending the safety of and interests of the British people as a whole, because unless we understand the real root causes of Muslim violence, etc., we cannot keep safe from it. And close with why my concerns are so big. Isn't it a bit hysterical? Very briefly, Naomi Klein, when she writes about the shock doctrine, about how, you know, ideas can be out there, and then, you know, it just takes some profoundly shocking event that shakes everyone's what they thought to be true, and then, you know, the unthinkable can become the thinkable, where these ideas are picked up. And that is what profoundly scares me about the ideas that are floating around about Muslims, the explanation, because, you know, in our lifetime or in our children's lifetime, what we could see when you look at that must galvanise us to action.
Thank you, Catherine. And on that note, I'd like to thank the three panellists, Catherine, Inayat and Naved. And we're now going to hand over, if you give them a round of applause. And we're now going to hand over to Hassan, who's going to be chairing the final session of the day, which will be interesting.
Indeed I am. Yes. Yeah, Jim's speaking first.
Sorry. Thank you so much.
Hey, how are you doing? Good to see you. I know.
Take a seat, take a seat.
No, go ahead. I'll send this one. I'll sit
Thank you.
Absolutely.